In a time connected, the gods were many, and as voices guiding men were confused and silent, there was a man who heard a single voice and believed in it. His name was Abram, but he would come to be verified as Abraham, the father of a multitude, the one whose legacy would traverse millennia, religions, nations, and cultures. Before kings and empires, before laws and temples, there was only faith and a calling coming from heaven. Abraham was not a hero like those who would become lenders among the ancient peoples. He had no sword, army, or throne. He had something rarer, a willingness to obey. In the silence of the desert, surrounded by uncertainties and unseen promises, he heard the voice of God and said, "Sim." This sim changed the course of history. Imagine abandoning everything, your land, your parentage, your security. Go to an unknown place, guided only by a promise. Come out of your land, out of your family, and out of your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. These words echoed in the heart of an ordinary man and ignited in him an extraordinary faith. He asked for no guarantees, just believed. But this serious faith tested. Doubts would circulate, mistakes would be made, and time, cruel as it is, would test every divine promise. Yet even in the safest of times, Abraham learned to trust, not in circumstances, but in the character of God. The story of Abraham is not only that of a father of nations, but that of a real, flawed, and courageous man who either believed when everything seemed impossible. In this video, we'll dive deep into Abraham's magazine, his calling, his struggles, his mistakes, his covenant with God, and most of all, his faith. Get ready to meet not only the patriarch of the writings, but the human being behind the promise. A journey marked by divine encounters, decisions of faith, and lessons that echo to this day. Abram lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a rich and culturally advanced city filled with gods and idolatries. He was the son of Terah, a respected man with possessions. In the eyes of the world, Abram had a stable life. He lived with his wife Sarai, owned serfs, cattle, and land. Nothing seemed to be missing, except one thing, a son. Sarai was barren, and that was a deep social stain back then. However, it was precisely in this scenario of apparent stability that God broke the silence. One day, without warning, without rituals, without prerequisites, a voice spoke to Abram's heart. It wasn't an ordinary voice, it was a voice that demanded everything. Get out of your land. It was a call to break with comfort, with the known, with insurance. It was an invitation to a journey that had no clear destination, only one direction. Abram, then 75, heard and obeyed. Simple as that. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, his servants, his possessions, and left. He did not know exactly where, but he trusted in the one who had called him. The departure was painful. Leave the homeland, family ties, habits, certainties. The journey was a long one. They crossed deserts, dangerous regions, faced the scorching heat of the day and the sharp cold of the night. The shepherds quarreled among themselves, the animals grew weary, the scarcity surrounded them. And yet, Abram walked. Each step was sustained by faith in a promise still invisible. Upon arriving in Canaan, God again spoke to him. "To your offspring I will give this land." But how? He didn't even have kids. Sarai remained barren, and the years continued relentlessly. Abram built an altar. He did not ask for evidence. He did not demand explanations. He just loved it. Soon after came the first challenge. A terrible famine ravaged the land. Abram then decides to go to Egypt in search of food. It was there that, for the first time, fear overcame faith. Afraid that the Egyptians would kill him for Sarai's beauty, Abram lies, saying that she is his sister. Sarai is taken to Pharaoh's palace, but God intervenes with plagues, protecting her. Even in his mistakes, God does not abandon him. Abram and Sarai leave Egypt with more riches than they entered, showing that God's faithfulness does not depend on human perfection, but on eternal purpose. Back in Canaan, the group is now numerous, and the shepherds of Abram and Lot begin fighting over territory. Instead of imposing his authority as the eldest uncle and leader of the clan, Abram acts with humility, proposes that they separate amicably. He allows Lot to choose whatever land he wants. Lot chooses the green meadows of the Jordan, which seemed prosperous in the eyes, but approached Sodom, a city marked with sin. Abram, on the other hand, remains in the hills, a place less attractive, but which would bring him alliance. Again, God appears and reaffirms the promise. "Lift up your eyes. All this land I will give to you and your offspring." It was as if God said, "You lost nothing by giving in. With me, you always win." At this point, Abram already demonstrated that his faith was not only to believe in words, but also to act with integrity and confidence, even in the face of uncertainty. He began to understand that God's promise was greater than any apparent choice. Still, the absence of an heir continued to echo like a silent wound. He was getting older, and so was Sarai. The nights were long, the days repetitive, and the promise seemed increasingly distant. It was necessary to believe and wait. Days turned into months, the months years, and the promise has not yet been fulfilled. Abraham, now growing older, saw Sarai's hair grow white. Hopes, once so vivid, now swung between faith and frustration. God's silence was a greater test than any desert. Each morning, Abraham looked up to heaven and wondered, "When, Lord?" Sarai, for her part, faced her own battle. Infertility in that culture was not just a physical issue, was a public shame. The barren woman was seen as cursed, useless. She hid her tears in silence, wondering why, even being chosen alongside such a faithful man, she was not able to bear the child of promise. Then doubt knocked on the door. It was not disbelief in God, but the kind of doubt that springs from prolonged waiting. Sarai, driven by despair and a desire to help fulfill her promise, makes a difficult decision. She offers her Egyptian servant, Hagar, so that she will bear a son in her place. Abraham accepts. Hagar gets pregnant quickly. To human eyes, it seemed that now the promise could be fulfilled. But God's ways are not like ours. Sarai's plan created division. Hagar, when conceiving, begins to despise her mistress. Sarai, wounded and ashamed, complains to Abraham. The home environment becomes tense, heavy. What was meant to be a solution turned into a conflict. Hagar runs away. Pregnant, alone in the desert, she meets the God who sees, El Roi. An angel appears to her, comforts her, and promises that her son, Ishmael, will also be a great nation. Hagar returns, not out of submission, but out of trust in the one who gave him dignity in the midst of pain. Ishmael is born. Abraham loves him. He plays with the boy, teaches him, believes that perhaps he is the promised son. But 13 years pass, and the promise still echoes in heaven. God appears again, and with him a new name. Abram becomes Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai is now Sarah, princess. It was the beginning of a new alliance. God seals with Abraham an eternal promise. Out of him would come an uncountable lineage. As a sign of this covenant, God commands circumcision. Abraham, even at the age of 99, obeys without hesitation. He and all the men in his house are circumcised. It was the symbol that they belonged to God, even without yet seeing the fulfillment of the promise. Then the news arrives. God says Sarah would have a son. Not Hagar, not another woman, Sarah. And hearing this, Abraham laughs. Not of mockery, but of unbelief mixed with hope. How would two old men have a child? But with God, impossible is only the beginning of a miracle. Shortly after, three visitors appear in Abraham's tent. They're different, he realizes. There is something divine about them. With hospitality, it offers food, water, rest. And then one of the figures announces, "A year from now, Sarah will have a child." Now it's her turn to laugh, and now of true unbelief. But the visitor asks her, "Why did you laugh? Is there anything impossible for the Lord?" It's a turn. God is reaffirming that His time is perfect and that the promise would be fulfilled not by human strength, but by supernatural power. It was the birth of true faith, one who believes against all hope, who resists logic, who stands even when everything says otherwise. Abraham begins to understand that his journey was not just about owning a land or begetting a child. It was about trusting, even in the dark. It was about learning that faith is not an event, is a process, one step at a time. And so he follows, now with the promise closer than ever, but still invisible. The sun was already beginning to decline as the three men who visited Abraham's tent rose to depart. While they were going to Sodom, Abraham accompanied them. But something about that farewell wasn't common. One of them, the Lord Himself in visible form, decides to reveal to Abraham something deeper. It was as if, after the reaffirmed promise, a weight of responsibility now came. "I will hide from Abraham what am I about to do," says the Lord, in one of the most impressive passages of the sacred text. It was the beginning of a divine dialogue that would mark history forever. God would judge Sodom and Gomorrah, cities steeped in corruption, violence, and moral depravity. And now the righteousness of God was on the way. But Abraham, upon hearing this, feels something different. He does not celebrate impending destruction. He pities. After all, there lived his nephew Lot, the one who had chosen the fertile plains and was now surrounded by spiritual darkness. With boldness and reverence, Abraham begins one of the most exciting moments in Scripture: intercession. "Lord, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous in the city? Won't you spare the place for their sake?" God hears and replies, "If I find 50 righteous, I will spare the city." Abraham continues, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. With each number, Abraham reveals his heart, a man not only of faith but of compassion, who understood the weight of divine justice but prayed for mercy. It is a silent but powerful twist. The same man who once lied in Egypt now dares to intercede before the Creator of the universe. His faith has matured. He is no longer just the man of promise, but a partner of God in caring for humanity. But the 10 righteous are not found. The 2 angels sent to Sodom find the city in deep decay. Lot receives them, but soon the men of the city surround his house with wicked intentions. The contrast to Abraham's hospitality is stark. Still, the angels protect Lot, blind the aggressors, and announce the city will be destroyed at dawn. Lot hesitates. His sons-in-law mock, but the angels take them by the hand and take them out of the city. "Escape for your life, don't look back." It's a moment of extreme tension. And then the sky opens and fire and brimstone fall on Sodom and Gomorrah. Cities are engulfed in smoke and flames. God's judgment is consummated. Yet in the midst of judgment, there is salvation. Lot escapes, but his wife, looking back, turns into a statue of salt. A gesture apparently small, but that reveals a profound truth. The heart attached to the past can prevent the future. God had fulfilled His word. Abraham, in the distance, watches the pillars of smoke rise to heaven. He did not know the exact fate of Lot, but he trusted in Him who judges the whole earth with justice. In the silence that follows, a new certainty is born in the heart of Abraham. God is faithful. He fulfills what promises, either to preserve life or to exercise judgment. And if the promise of a son seemed unlikely, now, after seeing the impossible happen in Sodom, Abraham's faith is further strengthened. He goes back to his tent. Sarah awaits him. They don't talk much, but something has changed. They had witnessed the character of God more intimately. It was not just God who promised. It was the God who acts, with justice, with mercy, with fidelity. Shortly thereafter, the promise becomes visible. Sarah, already old, begins to feel sick. His body, once dry as the desert, now begets life. The miracle begins in silence, in the womb of a sterile woman. But the story still holds other challenges. The sun rose over the plains of Mamre. The wind blew softly, and the tents swayed slowly. Within one of them, Sarah rested. But this time, it was not just the elderly woman who for decades carried the pain of silence in her womb. She was mother. Time had passed, the body had grown old, but the promise had been fulfilled. The baby's cry sounded for the first time, strong, alive, human. That sound broke the silence of years of waiting, of nights in clear, of prayers without apparent answer. Isaac was born, the promised child, and with it, a new time was born. Sarah laughed. He laughed with gusto, with tears in his eyes, with his hands on his face, without shame. A laugh that mixed surprise, relief, and gratitude. God gave me cause for laughter, and everyone who knows it will laugh with me, she said. It was the laughter of rewarded faith, not the laughter of unbelief from before, but that of the full assurance that God keeps his word, even when everything says otherwise. Abraham, now 100 years old, held his son in his arms with reverence. His eyes, once tired from waiting, now shone with tenderness and amazement. He, who had traveled through deserts, faced kings, built altars, and waited for decades, now saw in Isaac the reflection of a God who never forgets. Isaac's birth changed everything. The once silent tent was now full of life. The servants rejoiced. Women danced. The news spread through the neighboring regions. Abraham's wife Sarah gave birth. It was impossible. It was absurd. And for that very reason, it was living proof that God is above human logic. Not everyone celebrated. Hagar, the servant, watched from a distance. Ishmael, already a teenager, felt the change in the air. The son of promise now was Isaac, and Ishmael, though loved by Abraham, was the fruit of a human plan, not of divine promise. The climate between Sarah and Hagar, which was already tense, now became unsustainable. During a celebration, Ishmael mocked Isaac. It's the fuse. Sarah, protective and steadfast, demands that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. The decision tears the heart of the patriarch. Ishmael was his son as well. But God intervenes. Do not look bad to you. In everything Sarah tells you, listen to her voice, because in Isaac your offspring will be called. With pain in his heart, Abraham fires Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar, seeing the water finished, puts Ishmael in the shade of a bush and distances herself, unable to see his son die. She cries, but again God appears. An angel comforts her and opens her eyes to a nearby well. Ishmael lives, and God promises, I will make him a great nation. This episode is a turning point for Abraham. He begins to realize that although the promise is clearly fulfilled, there are losses, cuts, difficult decisions along the way. True faith is not always comfortable. It often requires detachment. The tent is back to routine. Isaac grows up healthy, runs among the pastures, learns from the shepherds, observes the altars built by his father. Abraham teaches him about the God who called him. It teaches about faith, about obedience, about promise. But little does he know that a new test approaches, the most difficult of all. Still, at that moment, Abraham lives the fulfillment of God's word. The promise now had a name, a face, laughter. And more than that, now he knew that God was not only able to promise, but faithful to fulfill. Even if it takes decades, even if it defies logic, even if it hurts. In the intimacy of the nights when the desert calmed down, Abraham looked at the stars as he had before, when he had nothing, just a voice, a promise, and a heart willing to believe. Now, with Isaac sleeping in the tent next door, he understood. The God of the stars is also the God of weeping, of the womb, of time, and of life. Time passed. Isaac grew up strong and curious. The attentive eyes, the easy smile, and the mind thirsting for answers. He followed Abraham wherever he went, observing every gesture of his father. He learned to care for the flocks, to build altars, to listen to the stories of the God he had promised. Isaac was not only the son of old age, was the son of miracle. Abraham, in turn, was now living in a new phase. He had received the fulfillment of the promise. His tent was full, his heart even more so. But he also knew that the God who calls and blesses also shapes. And shaping often means proving. One night, in the silence of the desert, God spoke again. This time, his words were different, straight, sharp as a sword. Now take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering over one of the mountains which I will show you. Abraham did not answer, didn't argue, didn't question, just obeyed. The next morning, he got up early, prepared the donkey, cracked wood, called 2 servants, and took Isaac. I didn't tell Sarah what I was going to do. How could? His steps were heavy, but his faith was firm. If God promised that from Isaac would come his offspring, then he had a plan. Maybe he'd resurrect the boy. Maybe there was another way out. But Abraham knew to obey would be the greatest act of trust. During the 3-day journey, Isaac walked alongside his father. He watched the landscape, carried the firewood, asked questions. Until, near the destination, he asks, "My father, we have the firewood, the fire, but where is the lamb for the Holocaust?" Abraham swallows in dry. His eyes fix the horizon and answers, "God will provide for you the lamb, my son." They arrive at the mountain. Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, and then tie Isaac up. The boy can't resist. He trusts the father, just as the father trusts God. There's heavy silence. Abraham lifts the knife. Heaven observes. It is at this very moment that the test reaches its apex. Tension is absolute. And then a voice echoes, "Abraham, Abraham." He immediately replies, "Here I am." Do not stretch out your hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, since you have not denied me your son, your only son. Abraham trembles. Her eyes fill with tears. He looks around and sees a ram trapped by the horns in a bush. God had provided. He always provides. He is Yahweh Yireh, the Lord who provides. Abraham offers the ram instead of the son. It is the most symbolic moment of your life. There, on that hill, a father offered his son, and God provided a substitute. Centuries later, in that very place, another father would offer his son, and this time there would be no substitute. The return home is silent. Abraham and Isaac need no words. They both lived something that marked them forever. Isaac saw the altar. He felt the rope and saw the provision. He understood that his father's faith was not theory. It was total surrender. Meanwhile, Sarah was waiting. She did not know what had happened. But when she saw her son return safe and sound, her eyes filled with tears. She embraces him tightly and, in silence, praise God who keeps promises, but who also tests the heart. Abraham's fame spreads. Neighboring tribes come to respect him even more, not as a warrior, but as a man who walks with God. People see in him something rare, someone who trusts even when they do not understand. But new challenges are approaching. Life, even with promises fulfilled, still holds surprises. And faith, even matured, must be continually nourished. Time is a silent sculptor. Without haste, he shapes faces, folds bodies, whitens hair. Abraham's tent, now quieter, was full of memories. Isaac grew up, already a young man in full force. But Sarah, once vibrant, already felt the weight of the years. The days were no longer so nimble, and gestures became slower. Still, there was in his gaze a peace that only comes from those who saw the impossible become real. Sarah was not only the wife of Abraham, it was the woman who laughed at the promise and then laughed at it. It was the mother who cradled the dream in her arms. And now, as the days progressed, she watched Isaac and saw in him more than a son, saw the faithfulness of God personified. But time, which gives, also takes. And the day came when Sarah did not wake up. The woman who accompanied Abraham at every step of the journey, who crossed deserts and faced doubt, now set out for eternal rest. She died in Kiriath Arba, in the land of Canaan, at the age of 127. The loss fell on Abraham like a dense shadow. The patriarch, who had already faced so many challenges, now dealt with a kind of pain that cannot be resolved with immediate faith: absence. He cried. Yes, the man of promise cried. It was not a cry of despair, but of love. He had lost his companion, the only one who truly understood the weight of the journey. Abraham got up, wiped his face, and went to find a worthy place to bury her. He did not accept to receive the earth as a gift, even though he was respected by all. He made a point of buying the cave of Machpelah at a fair price. It was more than a transaction, was a symbol. God's promise included the possession of the land, and now, for the first time, Abraham possessed a piece of it, not to plant, but to bury. The promise was now anchored even in death. Isaac, for his part, felt the world crumble as he lost his mother. He was very attached to Sarah, and her grief was deep. Abraham, seeing the sorrow of his son, began to reflect on the future. He knew he would not live forever. It was time to think about the next step, finding a wife for Isaac. But not any wife, someone who shared the same faith, the same lineage, the same calling. Then a new plot begins. Abraham calls his oldest servant, Eliezer, and makes him swear. He would not seek a wife for Isaac among the women of Canaan. Instead, he should travel to the land of his relatives and seek there an appropriate wife. The mission was delicate, long, and full of uncertainties. But Abraham trusts not only in the servant, but in God. The same God who guided his steps there also would guide the choice that would shape the future of his offspring. Meanwhile, Isaac continues to mourn, spends his days in the fields, thoughtful, isolated. Abraham watches from afar. You know he'll be leaving soon too, but not before ensuring that the flame of the promise remains lit. Between memories and longing, Abraham begins to write his story, not only with acts, but with legacy. He tells Isaac about the promises, the covenants, the altars, and shows him the paths he has traveled, the pains overcome, the miracles he has experienced. Transfers not only goods, transfers faith. And so, in that moment of pain and silence, something greater is born. The understanding that what God began in Abraham does not end with him. The covenant was eternal. And now, it would be up to Isaac to take the next steps, not as a protected child, but as heir to the faith. The desert burned under the midday sun as Eliezer, Abraham's most faithful servant, approached the ancient city of Nahor in Mesopotamia. His eyes sought rest, but his heart carried a greater weight, the mission of finding a wife for his master's son. Not just any woman, but the woman chosen by God. A mission that surpassed the human, was spiritual. Upon arriving near the city, Eliezer did what he had learned from his master. He prayed. He knelt by the well where the girls came to fetch water at dusk and made a direct request to God. "Lord, God of my lord Abraham, give me success today. Let the girl to whom I say, 'Incline, I beg you, your pitcher so that I drink,' and she say, 'Drink, and I will also give to drink to your camels,' be that which thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac." It was a prayer from those who knew the answer needed to be clear. He did not want to rely on human impressions, but on a divine sign. And before the prayer was over, the footsteps of a young woman approached. Her name was Rebecca. She was beautiful, kind, and strong. He carried the pitcher on his shoulders naturally. When Eliezer asked her for water, she did not hesitate. He gave him to drink, and then he offered water to all the camels. A simple gesture, but that hit a sign from the sky. That wasn't a coincidence, was providence. As she ran to refill the pitcher, Eliezer watched her silently, her heart racing. As soon as she finished, he offers her gifts, gold bracelets, a pendant, and asks about his family. Hearing that she was the granddaughter of Nahor, Abraham's brother, the servant prostrates himself and worships God right there at the edge of the well. Rebecca runs home and tells her mother and brother Laban everything. He goes to meet Eliezer and invites him to stay overnight. During dinner, the servant does not eat until he reports the entire mission that led him there. In detail, he recounts Abraham's promise, the order to seek a wife among relatives, his prayer, and Rebecca's gesture as a divine sign. Tension is in the air. Everyone listens in silence. When it ends, Laban and Bethuel, father of Rebecca, acknowledge, "This comes from the Lord," and they consent to the proposal. But still, the final decision was up to Rebecca. When asked, "Will you go with this man?" she answers without hesitation, "Ire." It is a response that echoes the call of Abraham decades earlier. Get out of your land, leave your family, head towards the unknown, guided by faith, not by guarantees. Rebecca, like Abraham, heard the voice of God through the signs and followed. The next morning, Eliezer and the entourage leave with Rebecca. During the trip, she asks questions. She wants to know about Isaac, about his story, about the God of Abraham. The servant, thrilled, shares everything. She realizes that she is not going to meet a stranger, but a destiny written by divine hands. Meanwhile, in Canaan, Isaac walked alone through the countryside at dusk. The heart still carried mourning for the mother, but also anxiety for the future. It was then, as he lifted his eyes, that he saw in the distance the camels approaching. And Rebecca, seeing him, comes down from the animal and asks, "Who is that man who comes by the field to meet us?" The servant answers, "Is my Lord." She covers herself with the veil. Isaac receives it, listens to the servant, and then he takes Rebecca to the tent of Sarah, his mother. There he takes her as his wife. The sacred text tells us, "And he loved her, thus was consoled after the death of his mother." This meeting was not just the beginning of a marriage, it was the living continuation of the promise. The union of Isaac and Rebecca was more than romantic, was prophetic. The story of Abraham would continue, now with new protagonists. But every new phase also brings new challenges. The legacy of Abraham was launched, but the walk of faith, as always, was still far from over. Time ran its course, and the desert, with its slow and relentless rhythms, sculpted faces and fine-tuned emotions. In Abraham's tent, now quieter and more reflective, there was a serene peace. The patriarchs saw Isaac's youth blossoming, saw Rebekah take lightly the role that once was Sarah's, and realized with humility that his journey was nearing its end. But before the last flame of his life was extinguished, he still had commitments to his calling. Abraham was never a man of passivity. Until his last days, he was driven by purpose. With the new generation on the move, he went on to organize the final details of his home, his clan, and the heritage of faith he would leave. Isaac and Rebekah, on the other hand, were at the beginning of a new story. The coexistence between them grew solidly. It wasn't just an arranged union, there was love. Isaac, silent and observant like his father, learned to love Rebekah not only for her beauty, but for her willingness to follow the same faith, the same obedience, the same surrender. Rebekah, for her part, found in Isaac a man of integrity, faithful, with her heart turned to God. In time, Rebekah attended the altar where Abraham prayed. He watched, learned, and gradually established his own faith. Abraham, seeing her like this, smiled. She was not only Isaac's wife, was the living continuation of the promise. But not everything was peace. The past sometimes returned with its noises. Ishmael, now far away, had become the leader of a great nation, as God had promised. The sons of Keturah, a woman whom Abraham had taken after Sarah's death, also began to form their own clans. The house of Abraham was large, full of descendants, but the heart of the promise was in Isaac. Knowing this, Abraham decided to take a definitive measure. He gathered all his possessions and organized the inheritance. He gave gifts to the children of his other wives and sent them away from the territory of Canaan. Isaac, however, received everything: the spiritual, material inheritance and the right to the earth. It was the faithful fulfillment of what God had said. In Isaac, your offspring will be called. It was an act of courage and obedience. Abraham did not act out of emotion, but out of divine conviction. He knew the promise needed clear direction, clean continuity. Any ambiguity could compromise future generations. During these decisions, Eliezer, the oldest servant, was always on the side of the patriarch. Now, already old too, he fondly remembered the stories lived, the trips, the prayers. Abraham and Eliezer, in a nutshell, shared a decades-long bond, a friendship between Lord and servant that had been shaped in faith, sweat, and trust. One afternoon, Abraham retreated under one of the trees of Mamre, where God had first appeared to him. His eyes were lost on the horizon, where the sky touched the desert. There, alone, he meditated. The journey was coming to an end. From Ur to Canaan, from Abram to Abraham, from childless to father of nations. He had failed, yes. He had feared, lied, hesitated. But above all, I had believed, and this was imputed to him by justice. There, in silence, he surrendered his spirit, not with pain, but with peace. He left as he lived, trusting. Isaac cried upon hearing of his father's departure. Rebekah supported him, but in the midst of pain, there was honor. Abraham was buried in the cave of Machpelah, next to Sarah. The place that once symbolized loss now became the landmark of a generation. The man who had heard the voice of God now rested, and his story would echo throughout eternity. Isaac walked more firmly. Now the weight of the inheritance rested upon him. It was his turn to build altars, to listen to the voice of the Eternal, to lead the people of promise. He was not only the son of the miracle, was the heir of an eternal purpose. And next to Rebekah, he would begin to write the next chapter of a story that would span centuries until he reached the one who would be called the son of Abraham. After Abraham's death, the clan's spiritual and family leadership fell entirely upon Isaac. He was now the patriarch. The promise was alive, but still pending multiplication. So a new challenge presented itself. Rebekah could not get pregnant. The same cycle of waiting that had marked the story of Sarah was now repeated in Rebekah. For 20 long years, Isaac cried out to God. And like his father, he learned that God's promises are fulfilled in his time, not ours. But unlike Abraham, Isaac did not seek shortcuts. He didn't take another woman. He prayed and waited. So, finally, the answer has arrived. Rebekah became pregnant. But from the beginning, something seemed different. Pregnancy was difficult, intense. There was a constant stirring within her womb. It was as if a battle was being fought there, even before birth. Concerned, Rebekah sought God. And the Lord answered with an enigmatic but powerful revelation. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will divide from your bowels. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. This prophecy marked the beginning of a new phase. When the time of delivery came, 2 boys were born, twins. The first, red-haired and hairy, was called Esau. The second came clinging to the heel of brother, was called Jacob. From the beginning, their personalities were distinct. Esau became a hunter, a countryman, impulsive. Jacob was quiet, homely, observant. And over time, a subtle division began to emerge, even inside the house itself. Isaac loved Esau, for he enjoyed the hunting and the food his son brought. Rebekah, in turn, loved Jacob. This division of affections, although silent, was creating a fertile ground for future conflicts. Years passed and the brothers grew, but the rivalry, even restrained, took shape. The critical point came on an ordinary day. Esau returned from the field exhausted and found Jacob preparing a stew. Extremely hungry, Esau asked for food, and Jacob strategically proposed an exchange. "Sell me today your birthright." Esau, overcome by haste and appetite, despised his right of inheritance. "What do I care about this right if I will starve?" and swore and sold. It was a seemingly banal moment, but loaded with prophetic weight. Esau exchanged an eternal calling for an immediate pleasure, and Jacob, with cunning, advanced a step toward what God had already announced, that the elder would serve the younger. However, this choice brought internal imbalances. Esau remained the father's favorite, and the final blessing, the word of authority that defined the fate of the lineage, had not yet been released. The climax was approaching. Isaac, already old and with his eyesight weakened, realized that his days were numbered. He calls Esau and asks him to go to the field to hunt, to prepare his favorite dish, so that he will then bless him. Rebekah listens, remembers God's promise, and plots a plan. She dresses Jacob with goatskins, prepares the dish in Esau's place, and sends it to his father. Isaac, confused, hesitates, but in the end blesses Jacob, thinking he is Esau. The blessing is irrevocable, and destiny is sealed. Shortly after, Esau returns. When he discovers the truth, a cry of anguish explodes. "You blessed my brother. What about me? Don't you have any more blessing?" Isaac trembles. He knows it was God, but Esau's pain is real. "I will kill you after the death of my father." Rebekah, fearing for Jacob's life, sends him away to her brother Laban's house. And so the twins part. The clan divides. The tension reaches its apex. Isaac, now alone with Rebekah, realizes the consequences of silent choices indoors. The blessing was released, yes, God's plan has advanced, but relationships have been hurt. The promise was still alive, but now mingled with pain. This critical point teaches something essential. The purpose of God is fulfilled, with or without our help, but when we try to accelerate it by our own hands, we can create cracks in hearts that will take years to restore. And yet, God's plan stood firm. Abraham's legacy was not lost. It just entered its most turbulent phase. The sand of the desert still marked Jacob's sandals when he left his parents' house. He left in a hurry, carrying the blessing of his father and the weight of his guilt. I did not know if I would return, nor if I would ever see Esau again. All I knew was that I was alone, or at least so I thought. The first night when he lay down to sleep, he used a stone as a pillow. The sky was clear, and the silence of solitude weighed on him. But in that desert, God spoke. In a dream, Jacob saw a ladder going from earth to heaven and angels going up and down it. On high, the Lord said, "I am the Lord, God of Abraham and Isaac. The land in which you lie, I will give it to you and your offspring." It was a clear promise. Even in flight, even in error, God was with him. When Jacob awoke, he exclaimed, "Actually, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He erected an altar, poured oil on the stone, and called that place Bethel, House of God. With a new spirit, he went on a journey to the land of Haran, where Laban, his mother's brother, lived. And when he arrived, he found a well, and there he also found Rachel, daughter of Laban. She took care of herds. She was beautiful, friendly, and upon seeing her, Jacob felt that his heart calmed down. He had found someone who would bring color to his walk. Laban welcomed him as a relative, and Jacob began to work for him. Shortly thereafter, he declared his love for Rachel and proposed a deal. He would work 7 years in exchange for her hand. Laban accepted. And the 7 years passed as days, so great was Jacob's passion. But on the night of the wedding, Laban deceived him. Under the veil and in the dark, he gave her Leah, the eldest daughter. When the day dawned, Jacob realized the mistake. It was a hard blow. He, the master of disguise, was now a victim of the same weapon. Enraged, he confronts Laban, who responds coldly. "In our land, do not marry the youngest daughter before the oldest." So Laban proposes, if Jacob works another 7 years, he can receive Rachel as well. And Jacob accepts. 2 wives, 2 sisters live under one roof. And with them, a new cycle of tensions, rivalries, and pains is born. Leah, despised, prayed to God, and he hears her. She begets children, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Rachel, barren, feels humiliated. The dispute between the two is growing. Both use handmaids as concubines to father more children. In all, 12 children are born. Each one tribe, one future people. But at that moment, they were the fruit of a divided house. Jacob, even surrounded by children, felt exhausted. The man who had fled from his brother now faced the weight of a manipulative father-in-law, 2 wives in emotional warfare, and the absence of true peace. He knew that his story with Laban was over. It was time to leave. Discreetly, he communicates to Rachel and Leah that he wishes to return to his land. The two, though different, agree. The father had used them as bargaining chips, and Jacob's home was now with them. Then he gathers his people, his flocks, and departs in secret. Laban, upon discovering, pursues him. But God appears to him in a dream and warns him, "Do not talk to Jacob, neither good nor bad." Confrontation happens. Harsh words are exchanged, but a peace pact is signed. Finally, Jacob is free. But there is a shadow on the way back: Esau. Jacob sends messengers with gifts, trying to appease his brother. The answer comes. Esau is coming with 400 men. Fear takes over Jacob. He divides his caravan, strategizes, and then, one night before the reunion, he is left alone. And there, he fights with God. A mysterious man appears and fights with him until dawn. It is not an ordinary physical quarrel, it is a spiritual, emotional, existential battle. Jacob clings, and when the other man tries to leave, he cries out, "I won't let you go if you don't bless me." The man touches Jacob's hip, dislocating it. And then it says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince, you fought with God and with men, and prevailed." Jacob limps, but with a new name, a new identity. Years passed. Jacob, now called Israel, settled in Canaan with his sons and servants. His life, which had been marked by escapes, mistakes, and reunions, entered a phase of stability. However, as always happens in the lineage of the chosen ones, the lull was only apparent. A new cycle was about to begin, and this time the protagonist would be one of his sons, Joseph. Joseph was the penultimate son of Jacob, but the first with Rachel, the woman he loved most. From an early age, Joseph stood out among his brothers. He was intelligent, upstanding, sensitive. But what set him apart the most was his faith and his dreams. God spoke to him in vivid visions, laden with symbolism. And Joseph, still young, did not keep these revelations to himself. One morning, after a dream, Joseph told his brothers, "I dreamed that we were tying beams in the field. My beam rose and stood, and yours bowed before it." Another day, another dream. "I saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing before me." The brothers listened to him silently, but envy grew in their hearts. They saw in Joseph not only the father's favorite who wore a special colored tunic, but a rival, a threat to the established order. Even Jacob rebuked him, but in a low voice, but in his heart he kept those words. He knew God was with the boy. Family tension increased. The brothers were moving away. They murmured among themselves. Jealousy mixed with hate. And then, on a journey to the field where the sons of Jacob shepherded the flock, a decision was made. Joseph was sent to check on them. Seeing him from afar, the brothers said, "Here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and see what will be of his dreams." Reuben tried to stop them, suggesting that they cast him into a dry cistern, intending to free him later. So they did. Joseph was torn from his tunic, beaten, and thrown into a dark hole. Inside, alone and wounded, he did not know that his life was about to take a painful and prophetic turn. While Reuben was away, the other brothers saw a caravan of Ishmaelites passing by. Judah had the idea. "What does it profit us to kill our brother and cover up the blood? Let's sell it." And so they did. Joseph was sold into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. The colored robe was stained with animal blood, brought to the father, and presented with a question that cut off Jacob's soul. "Is this your son's tunic?" Jacob, seeing her, tore his clothes, threw dust on his head, and wept bitterly. "Surely a beast devoured you," and refused to be comforted. "I will descend in mourning to the grave because of my son." Meanwhile, Joseph was taken to Egypt. There, sold again, now to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer. The land was strange, the language different, the customs hard. But with Joseph was something that no whip could pull out: the presence of God. Everything he did prosper. He excelled in the house of Potiphar, was placed as administrator. But his master's wife coveted him. Rejected, she accused him unfairly. Joseph was thrown into prison, again wronged, again down to the bottom. And right there, God was with him. His character remained intact, his dreams still lived, even though they seemed buried with him in oblivion. Meanwhile, Jacob, aged and grieved, distanced himself from faith. The man who once wrestled with God now dragged on his existence. The children saw their father's pain and were silent. None of them dared to tell the truth. The maximum point of tension was mounted. The promise that had passed through Abraham and Isaac now seemed fragmented. The spiritual air had been torn away. The father plunged into darkness. The brothers consumed by guilt. But, as in every great story of faith, it is just when all seems lost that God's plan begins to bloom, in silence, in the most unlikely place. The days in prison dragged on. Joseph, though wounded and forgotten, did not allow bitterness to take over his soul. He served, he prayed, he waited. The promise still lived, even buried under layers of silence and scourges. It was there, among the prisoners, that his skill was again manifested. Two men, Pharaoh's butler and baker, were thrown there. They dreamed the same night. In the morning, Joseph noticed their uneasiness and asked, "Are not God's interpretations? Tell me." The cupbearer told his dream, and Joseph said, "Within 3 days, you will be returned to your post." The baker told his, and the answer was harsh. "Within 3 days, your head will be taken from you." 3 days later, everything happened as Joseph said, but the cupbearer, restored, forgot Joseph. 2 years have passed, more silence, more waiting. But then Pharaoh dreams, and no one in the palace is able to interpret. The cupbearer, taken by remorse, remembers. There is a man in prison. Joseph is called. They shave his head, change his clothes, and bring him to the presence of the most powerful king on earth. Pharaoh narrates the dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin. 7 full ears swallowed by 7 myrrh. Joseph hears and humbly replies, "This does not come from me. God will give Pharaoh answer of peace." He reveals 7 years of plenty would come upon Egypt, followed by 7 years of devastating famine, and advises, "Look for a wise man to manage the country's resources." Pharaoh looks at his princes and then at Joseph. Would we find, perhaps, man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God? And on that very day, Joseph is raised to the throne, from prison to the governorate of Egypt. Dress with fine linen, put a ring on your finger, a gold necklace, and a new name, Zaphanat Paneah, secret revealer. At the age of 30, Joseph ruled Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, it stores food in every city. And then hunger begins, not only in Egypt, but in all the surrounding lands. And with it, an old story returns. From the north, Jacob's sons descend into Egypt to buy food. Joseph sees them, recognizes each face, but they don't recognize him. They're changed, older, tired, loaded. He speaks by interpreter, tests their hearts, wondering if it's still the same men who sold him. And then he asks for Benjamin, the youngest, blood brother. The brothers return to Jacob with a troubled heart. Joseph had said that he would not sell them anything without seeing his younger brother. Jacob resists. He fears losing Benjamin as he lost Joseph. But hunger compels. They descend again, now with the youngest. Joseph receives them, cries hidden, sees Benjamin, and it almost falls. But there was still one last test. Orders the royal cup to be placed in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers leave, he pursues them, discover cheat, and require Benjamin to remain a slave. And then the unthinkable happens. Judah stands up. He, the same one who suggested selling Joseph, now offers to stay in his brother's place. "Let me stay in your place. If I go back without the boy, my father will die of pain." That was the final test. Joseph cannot stand it, have everyone leave, and then, in tears, he reveals his identity. "I'm Joseph, your brother who you sold to Egypt." Silence is sepulchral. Brothers are paralyzed. Joseph approaches, doesn't accuse them, doesn't scream, says, "Do not weigh you, nor weigh you in your hearts. God sent me before you to preserve lives." They cry, embrace, forgiveness is complete, reconciliation is divine. The promise of God made to Abraham now passed through Joseph and was preserved through his pain, faithfulness, and vision. Pharaoh is informed and invites the whole family of Joseph to come down to Egypt. Cars, provisions, and land are offered. And finally, Jacob sees the son he thought dead. When he embraces him, he says, "Now I can die, for I have seen your face, and that you still live." 70 people from the house of Jacob go down to Egypt. The promise is secure. The seed of a nation is planted in a foreign land. The God of Abraham is still in control.